course, what happened under those programs were we saw a vast increase in the penalisation for non-compliance when it came to welfare payments. So I believe it was about 70% increase in penalisation compared to anyone else who received it. And, you know, it's these sorts of penalties when you're living in a remote community that often doesn't have phone reception and doesn't have access to the nearest Centrelink office can take, you know, 8 weeks, a few months to undo. So people were going hungry whilst being forced to do work in order to just get a welfare payment. The thing with these works, so 25 hours per week is a pretty decent part-time job, I would have thought. And under normal employment circumstances, someone working that amount would be able to access would be able to accumulate super, they'd have access to OHS provisions, they would be protected in various ways, shapes and forms. If accidents happened within CDP placements, what protections are there for the workers? And what sort of assurance, based on the fact that they've rolled this out to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, you know, how many election cycles do we need to go through? And my guess would be 1 to 2 before we see this exact same disgusting program just rolled out across the country. I will say this, despite last year being a really rough year, under COVID, the CDP was suspended, and all of a sudden a lot of these people who were exploited under the CDP not only found themselves not having their labour exploited, but also found themselves surprisingly with a reasonable amount of money to survive on for the first time ever. They now not only have people returned to the exploitative working conditions under CDP, but already severely impoverished communities are about to have their money further cut. Are we going to continue to allow the government to exploit the labour of unemployed workers whilst their wealthy makes profiteer? I just want to finish by saying we need to support a living wage. We need to support a safety net that looks after our most vulnerable, and we need to stop the exploitation of the most vulnerable people in this society and their labour. Thank you very much.
That's wonderful, Celeste. Thank you very much. It's terrific to hear from you, and we look forward to continuing to work with you. Of course, one of the things we're trying to do in this whole week of action that has been organised with events all over Australia, including a big one in Adelaide today, we hope, and also in Wollongong, we are trying to build the relationships between unemployed workers, welfare groups, unions and pensioner organisations. That means we all have to learn from each other about what our demands are, what their logic is, what they're for, and how we can work together jointly and build up that solidarity that we need. Our next speaker is from the Australian Unemployed Workers Union, and I'd like to welcome Jay Coonan, who has been very busy engaged in the actions in Canberra this week, and Jay is going to talk about the perspectives of the AUWU and building this alliance around our demands.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Celeste, as well. I'll just begin with the acknowledgement of country. Today we're meeting on Wurundjeri country. This is stolen land. I acknowledge our past and present and our sovereignty has never been ceded. The social security system is a product and weapon of colonialism. First Nations people are disproportionately impacted by the system compared to settlers, whether it's because of the higher representation of First Peoples in the system, the racist cashless debit card, or the forced labour scheme known as the Community Development Program. It's all of our responsibility to work towards justice for First Peoples, and we must first work together to dismantle the racist programs that continue colonial violence through our welfare system. So my name is Jay Coonan. I'm an anti-poverty activist and national co-coordinator of the Australian Unemployed Workers Union. I know the cruelty of the social security system all too well. I was raised in it as a child in a single-parent family. I've spent the better part of my adult life in the system, and I've been penalised by it too. Just the other day I was briefed by my job agency. They claimed I didn't attend a meeting when they never called it. But I know my rights, so they reversed it. When we know our rights, we are powerful. And that's why they're scared when we stand up for ourselves and support each other to fight back. This is not a system for us. It's a system that achieves nothing but profits for private companies leeching off of the public to brutalise the most vulnerable people in society. It rewards the worst unemployment providers who suck up public money by hurting unwaged workers and generating profits from us when we find our own job. The workers in these companies are themselves subjected to awful workplace cultures, are overworked and face high burnout rates. Those of us who are unwaged, underemployed and insecure workers in the welfare system are forced to apply for jobs that aren't there and to complete bullshit tasks like training for how to dress for a job interview.
Arlene
It's
says
demoralising,
volume.
insulting and
now it's better.
condescending. During COVID, when these pointless activities were enforced, these companies lobbied the government and received massive payouts for doing absolutely nothing. At the same time, they lied, abused, harassed unemployed people to extract even more money from us. This is a system that was never designed to help a person. It's a tool used to oppress the working classes. We all have the same basic needs, yet the current system prevents many from accessing support. It discriminates against people on the basis of age, family situation, and visa status. Parenting payments and partner income tests were designed to oppress women and force them to rely on their male partners. And in 2021, these relics of the 20th century remain. Our welfare system traps young, older, and vulnerable people in dangerous environments, whether that be through the grossly low poverty payment or the continuation of partner and parental income tests. Unemployed workers are experts because they're subjected to this system. We know it inside out, and we know what it means to be affected by decisions over which we have little control. Decisions made by people who are given power and money to ignore those they're supposed to represent. Unemployment is not a moral failure, but a structural failure. Asking for a hand up should not be treated with punishment and pain. The increase to working age payments during the pandemic showed how easy it is to keep people out of poverty. The government exposed the lie that it's necessary for us to live in the destitution they had previously forced us to accept. The $550 per fortnight COVID supplement was a response to a crisis. Unemployment and economic insecurity are crises and deserve the same response. I bought the most social security payments up to the Henderson poverty line of $80 a day for the first time in decades. Yesterday, the government made its decision to try and crush us with poverty, and the Parliament waved it through. This after we went to Canberra to tell them loud and clear that our welfare system kills people and that cutting the rate would only make things worse. This week I spent 4 days in Canberra protesting these cuts, with activists and unionists and lobbying our so-called representatives, asking them to have a heart and to fight for a raise. I learned how little the legislators who make the rules that oppress us actually know about the poverty industry they've created. On 1 April, 2 million people will suffer a brutal cut of up to $180 a fortnight, and every single one of them relies on a poverty payment to survive. Hundreds of thousands more are likely to enter the system when JobKeeper ends in just 2 weeks. Low-wage workers trapped on unemployment payments will take the biggest cut, and mutual obligations will become even more punishing. As they do this, the government is using tools like JobMaker wage subsidy and gutting IR laws in a push to create even more precarious work that will see increasing numbers of unemployed people trapped on unemployment payments long term. Right now, a person who works nearly 30 hours a week in a minimum wage job is still on welfare payments and still below the poverty line. Poor people in this country are tired. We are tired of being kicked by our own government. We are tired and angry about being used as a political football and an economic tool designed to hurt waged workers, rather than as human beings with rights who deserve care, support, and to be able to afford the basics needed to live. The rights of waged and unwaged workers are intrinsically linked. I stand here in solidarity with those in waged work because I know my experiences in the welfare system are designed to undermine the wages and conditions of those who have a job. We need what we need is action. We need justice for 250,000 people on job seeker who are in paid work but still trapped in poverty. Justice for the 250,000 people who are on job seeker and are disabled. For the 300,000 people over 55 who experience workforce discrimination and may never work again. We need a livable income guarantee, a job for everyone who wants one, and the control of communities to be returned to us. An attack on unwaged workers' rights is an attack on waged workers' rights. The choice they made this week to force millions of people to live on half the poverty line tells us what we already know. That we can't rely on heartless, calculating politicians to create the change we desperately need just because it's the right thing to do. We have to stand together and fight to force their hand to break the poverty machine. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. And so we
nice and close now. My
we
speaker's
strengthen our
there,
learning
so
about
move your thumb.
the poverty machine.
All right, 'cause
that
the
it's
speaker's
focused
there.
not just on the situation of people who are dependent upon unemployment benefits or the pension and other government benefits, but also upon wage workers. And we'll hear later in the program of speakers, representatives from unions who can talk about the downward pressure on wages and what that means as far as working class families are concerned, trying to support people who are now living, as Jay so aptly put it, halfway below the poverty line.
This is Don.
Now, our next speaker, we are really lucky to have our next speaker. She's come from Hervey Bay and she runs a Facebook page and is a leading and renowned organiser around the No Cashless Welfare Debit Card. She's a wonderful organiser and a magnificent champion of those people who are subjected to the cashless welfare debit card. And we are really lucky to have you, Catherine. You've been in Canberra, and you've been in Brisbane, at a rally in Brisbane yesterday, and now you're in Melbourne. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Don. Welcome to everybody here. I'm glad to be here. One of the things I want to emphasise about the cashless debit card, it is going to impact many, many thousands of casual workers, because if you're working 30 hours a week on minimum wage and you are on $1 of Centrelink payment, you will be subject to the trigger payments list and you will end up on the cashless debit card. So I just want to really stress that for people who think I've got a job, it won't affect me, because it really, really will. It already is impacting so many people across the country, 12,000 people, and then as of yesterday we see the Northern Territory will start their rollout of another 25,000 people, and also yesterday, for the first time ever, the old age pensioners in the Cape York are now going to be forced onto this cashless debit card. Right? That is a foothold situation. All the other regions are saying now that the old age pensioners can volunteer for the card, as if you're going to volunteer for this kind of oppression. Because the cashless debit card contracts you without your consent to a private company, or in the case of the Northern Territory, a credit union, without your consent. You're under their control. You've lost your consumer protections under law, your statutory rights under law, and the social security protections of payments you've been exempted from, in order for these third parties to take over 80% of your income, and then you have to beg to pay rent or pay a car loan, or in a lot of cases a lot of bills can't be paid and people have to simply try and use their 20% pittance in order to go and do what they can do. But we've had lots of families rendered homeless, breach notices, and now we've got situation in the regions with housing crisis that landlords don't want to rent to people on the Indu cashless debit card because they don't want their mortgages to be delayed and paid rent. Right? We've had people that have lost their lives to the loss of autonomy and they can't deal with it, the mental health strain, the segregation of children especially, and because all of a sudden your community events in the regions are all cash. Your kids can't partake and get a face paint or go on a ride or get a bottle of water. Okay? Sports day at Ceduna, 3 weeks ago. All the families with the kids on the cashless debit card did their sports day. Then they had to take their kids home because they didn't have the money for the barbecue afterwards. And I had a parent that's like, what do you do with a 5-year-old that's screaming, being dragged across the lawn because they want a fruit cup, but they can't have one because mum and dad are on the cashless debit card and they're excluded. This is damaging the kids as well as the families and the parents, right? Speaking to another parent last couple of days, suddenly realised they've been on the card for 2 years. Her children are too young. They don't even know what money is. Don't understand. So for the first time, she allowed a child to take some money to school for a lunch order, and the child inadvertently threw the change in the bag in the rubbish bin because she didn't know it was money. Yeah. I mean, that's horrendous, isn't it? You know, they're not teaching our kids about money in these regions either. One of the most despicable things I think that they do is women who are under domestic violence, right? They're stuck in refuges around the country. They're shipped to card regions like Ceduna and Bundaberg. Or if you're in Brisbane, DV Connect ships families up to Bundaberg to go on the cashless debit card. More abuse, more financial control from people that are already traumatised and come out of situations, right? But once you're on that card, you try getting out of domestic violence situation, because you can't just check into a motel and pay for it. They're on the banned list. You can't get away. You can't access the cash. Right, we've got some horrific stories over the last 6 years that I've been dealing with this, and I've brought a lot of information down for people to look at. I've thoroughly urged people to learn up about everything, because this is the privatisation of social security payments. Yep. Right, not only to a company like Indu, who at the moment control 12,000 people, but over the course of the next couple of years, they're racing to get the big four banks signed up, so they will be taking over your income. And if you're receiving family tax payments, disability support pension, carers pensions, anything like that, and you're still receiving $1 of social security payments, that's it. You'll go on the card, then your bank can take control. We need to fight this and keep fighting it. Australians are not slaves to the corporates and should not be sold off as such. $255 million in the last 5 years has been pumped into India alone. How much are the banks going to make off of the poverty that they're putting these people into? So I urge people, please do your research, because it applies downward pressure on wages. It affects workers. It affects carers, disabled people, parents, students, kids having to drop out of uni because they can't buy their textbooks. You can't ride on a regional bus service because they don't take the card. How are you supposed to get to a job agency? Right? If you're on base rate job seeker, you get $8.79 a day as your cash allowance. How are you supposed to do anything with that? You know what I mean? The second-hand economy is vital to people living in poverty. $2 billion. Access to school uniforms, computers, beds, clothes, you name it. People are locked out of it. But Harvey Norman's approved. You expect to go and spend your money in Harvey Norman. You get 1,000 stuck on that card and you need to buy something second-hand that's going to save you a fortune. They'll turn around and say, go to Harvey Norman or go and sign up for Afterpay, and you can make the repayments through Afterpay using your card. Yep. Rather than let people have their money to go and buy the bargain down the street and save half price. You know what I mean? It's cruel. Most of the women I know that are on this card are medicated. And it has to be the mental health collapse in the regions, the self-harm, the suicide, and in the First Nations communities, the reports I get back is they're all war zones. The crime's through the roof and they are war zones. This is not right. This is the destruction of every safety net, and it impacts us all. And our old age pensioners have to realise, they're not going on it tomorrow, but it's coming.
No, it's coming.
And all I can do is urge people, please stand up, read up, and don't worry about the drugs, gambling and alcohol, because guess what? People can buy all the drugs and gamble and buy all the alcohol they want on the cashless debit card, especially if you're outside of a region.
Shaking, guys.
It doesn't stop people who partake in that sort of thing getting access, but the average, the 99.9% majority of people who need access to every dollar are criminalised, penalised and broken.
Thank you, Catherine. Wow. Not bad for no speech notes. Well done. Thank you,
about that?
Catherine.
To workers who are able to get into waged jobs, no matter how precarious. And we're going to learn a lot more about that there and how the two things interact in the poverty machine. So our next speaker comes from the Fair Go for Pensioners, which is a coalition of pensioner organisations.